It was a beautiful September day, but Sean Taylor was trapped in his car in one of the worst cases of gridlock he had ever seen. He tried to look on the bright side though, and while he was stuck in an unmoving car, at least he had a pleasant view of the wide, shimmering lake just off the road next to him. He was admiring the scene when tiny drops of rain started landing on his windshield. That's funny. There wasn't a cloud in the sky a moment ago. There was something off about the rain though. It looked dirty, a rusty red color. Was that blood? He didn't have time to think about it, because just then a thick, dense mist began to roll over the lake. A fog of blood. Just off the side of the road, he could see a huge silhouette rising out of the water. Is that an old submarine? What Sean didn't know was that he was about to have an encounter with SCP-1861, also known as the HMS Wintersheimer, a ghostly submarine with strange and terrifying effects. Sean and the other drivers stuck in traffic that day were far from the first people to have a dangerous brush with this legendary vessel. According to SCP Foundation records, the HMS Wintersheimer has been appearing since as early as 1916. The first recorded incident occurred in the British seaside town of Innsmouth-on-Sea. You won't find this town on any maps or in the history books, and you're about to find out why. The 500 population of the town, which had already reduced by the wartime draft into the currently raging Great World War, awoke to red skies on February 6, 1916. Citizens left their homes to investigate, only to find their entire town had been enveloped in a thick red mist. The swelling crimson clouds up ahead began to rain, showering the town in a hail of viscous red goop. Anyone unlucky enough to taste it would say that this strange rain was a dreadful mix of salt and copper. This was because, as the Foundation would later determine, the rain and fog was a disgusting combination of saltwater, human blood, and human cerebrospinal fluid. But the real threat was rising just beyond the beach. Technically speaking, the HMS Wintersheimer vessel is designated as SCP-1861-A. It appears to be a World War I era British B-class submarine, designed by Vickers for the Royal Navy in 1904. By 1916, this particular type of boat was already on its way to being obsolete, and were largely deployed in Malta, far from the active fronts. So one of these vessels appearing on an otherwise unremarkable stretch of English coastline should have been a clue that something was terribly wrong. But the poor residents of Innsmouth-on-Sea didn't know the half of it. Soon, figures in what appeared to be archaic diving gear began emerging from the Wintersheimer and made their way into the township. They seemed terrified, running up to and frantically screaming at any local they could find. "Please listen to me. Something terrible is about to happen here. We need you to come with us or you're all going to die. You must believe us." The locals were frightened by what they heard. They'd been listening to news reports of the Great War unfolding across the globe for 2 years now. Had it finally come to them? They pictured shells raining down from the sky, decimating their defenseless little town in a rain of fire. The Navy must have been brought in to save them before the German bombardment began. While some took more convincing than others, the men in diving suits, known as SCP-1861-B, eventually managed to persuade the entire town to join them and lead the townspeople down to the water. One by one, they were all boarded onto the submarine, hundreds of them. Many couldn't believe their eyes as they watched scores of people disappear in front of them into the dark bowels of the Wintersheimer. Where were they all going? How would they all fit in there? But it was too late for any of them to back out now. The vessel submerged once more, and everyone was gone. The entire population of Innsmouth-on-Sea had disappeared in a rain of fog and blood, never to be seen again. The Foundation wiped all records of the town from existence and delivered appropriate amnestic treatment to anyone who still mentioned or remembered Innsmouth-on-Sea. The fate of those who board the HMS Wintersheimer is always the same: vanish from the face of the earth, explained away by the Foundation as accidental death by extreme weather event. There have been hundreds of documented sightings of SCP-1861, and the anomalous weather event can occur near any body of water wide enough to accommodate SCP-1861-A's comms tower and topmost platform. Depth does not seem to be any hindrance of the submarine appearing, and it can even manifest in water that's just a few inches deep. As Sean and the other unfortunate victims of the rush hour traffic were being showered in thick red droplets from above, a crimson mist rolled in between the cars. Sean had heard of so-called freak weather events before, like raining frogs and fish, but this was something different, and it frightened him. He could see now that the silhouette rising from the lake really was an old submarine, and he watched as a legion of mysterious figures disembarked from the vessel and began spilling onto the road. The men in ancient-looking diving suits walked among the cars, and one of them approached Sean's car. He began tapping frantically on the window, and Sean could tell he was yelling something. Sean was scared and more, but more than anything else, he was confused. Against his better judgment, he rolled down the window just a crack to hear what the man was saying. His British accented voice muted by the diving suit, the man frantically told him, "Sir, please listen to me. I'm Lieutenant Samuel Ramsey of the HMS Wintersheimer. We're evacuating the area. Please, you've got to come with me. We're in danger out here." HMS? Sean thought. Isn't that what they call British ships? What was a British submarine doing in the middle of a lake in the United States? Through his windshield, Sean could already see other men in diving suits leading people from the cars out towards the submarine. Something had to be going on here, something big. Lieutenant Ramsey was still banging away at the glass of Sean's window, becoming increasingly agitated. "Sir, if you won't comply with my orders, I'm within my rights to take you by force for your own safety." Sean could feel the fear setting in, but he didn't know what else to do. He turned off the car and took off his seatbelt. He was just about to open the door when there was a tap on the passenger side window of his car. It was a soldier in what looked to be advanced tactical gear. There were several soldiers directing cars to drive on the shoulder to get around the mess of stopped automobiles. Sean looked to his left, and the man in the diving suit was gone. The soldier tapped again, and Sean didn't need to be told twice. He followed his directions and drove around the traffic jam and out of the mist. A half-mile down the road, Sean was stopped by another group of soldiers and given an amnestic. He drove away, never knowing how close he had come to vanishing in the bowels of SCP-1861-A. Sean was lucky that one of the SCP Foundation's mobile task forces had taken over the situation, but they were too late to help those who had already complied with SCP-1861-B's orders and boarded the Wintersheimer. The task force made it their business to save whoever they could, but that wasn't their only directive. The Foundation had recorded a huge number of SCP-1861 instances since 1916, and now they were finally going to figure out what was going on inside. The Foundation had already discovered that those taken onto the Wintersheimer don't simply disappear. Once on board the submarine, they are forced into a diving suit of their own, which transforms them into new instances of SCP-1861-B. Upon realizing this, Foundation scientists devised an ingenious plot. 6 months before this latest instance of 1861, the Foundation dispatched 2 members of D-Class personnel who were familiar with one another into the red mist. One was instructed not to interact with SCP-1861-B, while the other, named Sal, was ordered to enter the submarine. His mission was to report back all findings to Foundation researcher Dr. Clutch during the next 1861 event. The D-Class who remained on shore was brought in once more by the Mobile Task Force during the September event that Sean witnessed. They checked each diving suit wearing anomaly until they heard a familiar voice, muffled by the mask. It was Sal, and he'd been transformed into an instance of SCP-1861-B. The human D-Class, receiving questions from Dr. Clutch via remote broadcast, commenced the interview of his former friend. It is from this vital interview that much of the Foundation's knowledge of the mysterious HMS Wintersheimer is drawn. According to Sal, the interior of the Wintersheimer, which is a long, narrow passageway, is a spatial anomaly that seems to stretch on forever. This explains how vast number of people, like the entire population of Innsmouth-on-Sea, can disappear into the submarine at once. Sal reported that, about an hour after entering the vessel, the hatch closed and the interior began rapidly filling with water as the submarine descended. Prisoners of the Wintersheimer were faced with 2 choices: suit up or drown. Few chose the latter option, and as soon as the suit was on, the transformation had begun. As soon as everyone was suited up and the submarine had fully descended, causing the 1861 weather event to dissipate on Earth, the Wintersheimer had effectively entered an alternate dimension. The airlock opened, and the new recruits were instructed to step outside and take a look around. the Wintersheimer veterans informed the new sailors that everyone on land was likely already dead by this point. When Sal first exited the submarine, he commented on everything around him looking eerily similar to how it looked on land before the mist descended, but with one key difference. It seemed as though everything was underwater. Well, not quite that. It was almost as though everything was water, like the world had taken on a kind of flowing liquid state. Sal and the others existed in this otherworldly land of living water for 6 months, and as the months passed, things only got stranger. They found that they neither needed to eat nor sleep. According to Sal, all they did was breathe and pass the time by exploring and talking to one another. Anyone who attempted to take off their suit would dissolve and diffuse into the same liquid that surrounded them. Dr. Clutch asked Sal about the other inhabitants of this alien realm, and this was when things got truly disturbing. There were dead humans and animals floating all over the place, missing their eyes as though they'd been scooped out, and missing their mouths, as though they'd been bitten out of their face by some kind of huge predator. Their empty eye sockets bled constantly, and Sal theorized that this may have something to do with the anomalous blood mists of SCP-1861. When asked to provide more information on why all the corpses were mutilated in this way, Sal said that one of his superiors on the Wintersheimer told him, "The watcher of eyes and biter of teeth deemed them worthy." Whatever this mysterious being was, it seemed to be a powerful figure within 1861's water world, and Sal felt lucky that he never had a direct run-in with the creature himself. For his final request, Dr. Clutch asked Sal to attempt to remove his suit. The Foundation had learned in previous instances of 1861 that the diving suits have anomalous durability, and it was impossible for anyone other than the wearer to remove them. Hence why the Foundation could never deal with 1861-B by using brute force. Naturally, Clutch was interested in finding out what was going on underneath. Sal expressed fear and anxiety at first, wondering if after all he'd been through, whether he could ever be considered human anymore. Eventually, he was convinced to remove the suit, and his worst fears were confirmed. The second Sal removed his helmet, gallons of seawater poured out, and the now empty suit collapsed to the ground. Sal's body was never found. Only some teeth and a pair of eyes were recovered. The eyes were later confirmed to be belonging to a young girl, and the teeth were identified as having come from a European red deer. And so, the dark mystery of the HMS Wintersheimer continues. Because of the unpredictable nature of its appearances and the resulting difficulty of containing it, the Wintersheimer has earned a Keter classification. The only containment procedure currently employed by the SCP Foundation is for mobile task forces to try and intercept the submarine when appearances are reported, and hopefully prevent or at least reduce the kidnapping of civilians. With so many questions left unanswered, all we can say for certain is that if a red mist ever descends on you, and a stranger in a diving suit tells you you're in grave danger, he's absolutely right. Now go check out SCP-035 The Possessive Mask and SCP-087 The Stairwell for more freaky stories from the SCP Foundation.